Good evening. You're watching the explosive weekend debate with me, Toya Singh. As you're possibly already aware, hours ago, Israel formally declared war on Palestine for the first time since 1973. Now, this is a situation that was sparked by missiles fired by the Hamas group from the Gaza Strip into Israel on Saturday morning. As Israel tanks arrive at the Gaza Strip in what is being described as a possible retaliatory ground invasion, we look to understand what does this mean for the 2.5 million people who live in the Gaza Strip. What do the last 38 hours mean for Israel's relationship with this region and with the West Bank? And lastly, what does this do to the complex inter-country dynamics that are playing out constantly in the Middle East? Our question today, set against these visuals that you can see of tanks heading towards Gaza, multiple reporters saying that a possible ground invasion may take place tonight. All right, now that we've set the stage, let's move to the actual conversation. To take a deeper dive into the story, we have with us three guests on the show this evening. Hananya Naftali, a senior journalist, is with us. We have Jay Engelmeyer, a publisher, the executive editor of The Judean, and Manju Seth, a former diplomat. All three of you, good evening. Thank you for joining us here. Mr. Naftali and Mr. Engelmeyer, I'd like to thank you especially for joining us. I believe both of you are joining us from Israel in this moment. Mr. Engelmeyer, if I may actually come to you first, before we actually take a dive into the discussion, if you could just tell us what the last 38 hours or so have looked like for you, for your family, where in Israel you are right now.
So right now I am in Modi'in, in my home city, which is a central city located about 25 kilometers northwest of Jerusalem and 25 kilometers southeast of Tel Aviv. When this war broke out, we were up north camping by the Jordan River with some family, and about 6 o'clock in the morning, phones started to ring. Everybody woke up. It was we were notified of what was going on. I currently have two children in the Army, a son and a daughter. They're both down in the area. It's been heart-wrenching. It's not easy. It's not easy when your son tells you that 10 of his friends in his unit were killed. It's something that weighs on you because, you know, not just your children, but the children of your friends and your friends' friends and your children's friends. That being said, it's also been infuriating. I've been watching the coverage from international sources, and the coverage that seems to be chosen by some of the larger outlets is very, very tapered. They're not really showing the full picture. It's almost as if what happened yesterday in the morning when Hamas came in and first started to attack a festival, 3,000 people that were there, mostly kids, mostly youths. And just on a personal note, the people that were there are probably people who were very, very pro-Palestinian and probably were people who were out protesting on Saturday nights against the government. and the horrors of that, and then overtaking the base, and then not just stopping with the base, but going in towards the communities around Gaza, which I have to say, according to every international law and every international rule and every international ruling there's been, those communities are Israel proper. No one's ever disputed that, but for some reason they're called settlements and they're called occupied territory, which essentially is saying that Israel itself is occupying the entire state of Palestine, which is not correct. So I've been infuriated with the coverage of it, but at the same time, I have a personal skin in the game because I've got two children down there in harm's way.
Can I ask you a follow-up question before we go to our other guests? This question is
Sure.
more of me asking you to explain to our audiences. One of the things we've just shared with our audiences is that this is the first time Israel is declaring war since 1973. Now, when you live in
That's
India,
correct.
you often hear of Israel, of Palestine, of conflict taking place. But just to understand the gravity of this situation in particular, the fact that this is the first time since 1973, could you explain to us more of the context?
Sure. So 1973, obviously, actually was 50 years ago to the day yesterday, 1953.
Right.
1973 was when Egypt and Syria invaded Israel. It was the on Yom Kippur, on a holiday, actually the most solemn day in the Jewish calendar. And Israel was caught off guard. They had intelligence that something was happening, but they didn't expect it to happen on that day specifically. So a lot of people were not ready. A lot of people went home to celebrate the holiday. And it turned into a full-scale invasion. About a day after Yom Kippur, the Prime Minister at the time, Golda Meir, declared war, got permission from the Knesset to declare war, and she declared war. In every event that's happened since, there hasn't been a war. It's been considered, the English word, I guess, to translate would be operation. So as an example, if rockets are being fired at communities from Gaza, and Israel decides that they want to stop those rocket fire because it's not one-off, it's not just a few here and there, it's become incessant, they'll create what's called an operation, and usually those will last 3, 4, 5 days, maybe a week tops. A war is something a little bit different. It involves a lot more mobilization. It involves a different vibe within the society itself. When 2021, when the Operation Protective Shield was going on down by Gaza, life went on as normal. Israelis went to work, their supermarkets were open, shops were open, kids went to school. This case, I went to the mall this morning, everything was closed. The only thing that was open was supermarkets, and they were packed. People are stocking up because there's a lot of things that we know we're not going to be able to get in the coming days. A lot of factories that supply foods and a lot of the import ports by Ashdod are basically cordoned off right now, so nothing has been able to come in. And so a war essentially gives the prime minister the ability to shut down the country, to give the army the ability to go ahead and do what they need to do. It's also more massive in terms of the call up. Right now, I think the number is 13,000 reservists are being called up. But from what I understand, after this war declaration, you can have 100,000 reservists being called up.
Okay, so thank you. I'm going to ask you to stay. I want to now go over to Hanania Naftali,
Sure.
who's also joining us from Israel. Hanania Naftali is a senior journalist. Sir, can I ask you now, I want to shift our conversation. We've spoken right now about what the last few hours have looked like in Israel. I just want to ask you, sir, we've been telling our audiences that as we speak, troops and tanks are moving towards the south. They're moving essentially towards the Gaza Strip. And we're learning, some reports are telling us that an invasion may be imminent. I just want to ask you, sir, what is the view across Israel? Because in that strip of land, you of course have 2.5 million people. Some possibly support Hamas in a large capacity. Some are civilians. We know that the Prime Minister of Israel has told people to leave. But multiple media outlets are pointing out that people don't have anywhere to leave to if they are from Palestine and they are within that strip. Can you tell us what the public perspective on this is?
Absolutely. So I have to say that, after being attacked, this was an attack on a sovereign country.
Right.
A barrage of rockets, thousands of rockets, sent millions of Israelis to the bomb shelters. So just imagine what life is like for um, families here, for my wife and I, who are, as we are doing the interview right now, I need to keep an ear open for possible sirens. So this is an attack on a sovereign country, and in the same way, India does not accept any attack on terrorist attack on its sovereign country, as we saw in the 26/11 Mumbai attacks. We are facing right now a radical Islamist attack, and Israel has every right to defend its citizens. It's not just a right, it's a duty to make sure that civilians are safe. So Israel will do whatever it needs to do in order to restore peace, restore order. We have seen that the Middle East recognizes the fact that Israel is not the problem, but rather a partner for peace, as we saw for Arab countries making peace with Israel. And actually, many viewers might be surprised that they are actually united with Israel against radical Islam, against what Hamas represents. Now, given the Gaza Strip, I actually served in the Armored Corps, and in the 2014 Gaza War Protective Edge Operation, I was sent into the Gaza Strip, and we were given strict commands to not harm any Palestinian civilians, as the senior heads of the Israel Defense Forces also said that our enemy is not the Palestinian people, but the Hamas terrorist organization. So you can see this difference, that Israel targets terrorists while Hamas targets civilians. And don't believe my words. Look, when Hamas infiltrated the Gaza Strip, they immediately ran for Israeli communities, kidnapped civilians. So we have every right to defend our territory.
Can I ask you a follow-up question here? So this is not something we were aware of when you talked right now of the fact that you have been in the military, you understand the ground situation. I want to ask you then, one of the things that we have talked about in the last few days is how hard it is, because a lot of the times Hamas will use civilians' houses to launch their missiles, for example. Can you tell us a little bit more about the challenge that then poses for Israeli forces?
Absolutely. So, number one, many people would not recognize the fact that before the Israeli Air Force retaliates and strikes terror targets in Gaza, we always see the footage of it. But in fact, the Israeli Air Force usually does what we call roof knocking. So it would, first of all, drop a warning into that target so that locals/civilians could evacuate. And also it sends warning messages so that people will not get hurt. So we do everything in our power, the Israeli army, to make sure that civilians are not hurt in this extremely densely populated area with, like you mentioned, about 2 million people packed in there. So we do understand, and Israel does recognize the fact that many Palestinians have nothing to do with it and are also taken, in a way, hostage in the hands of Hamas, because anyone who stands up to Hamas, as we have seen in previous months and previous years, they are facing death, torture. So Israel does everything in its power to make sure that civilians are not hurt, and in the same way, at the same time, to accomplish the mission, because at the end of the day, we must defend ourselves. No country would have sat back and do nothing.
Can I just ask you, sir, to stay with us? I want to go back to Mr. Engelmayer, who gave us the first question. Mr. Engelmayer, I want to ask you a very similar question here. We saw what the Prime Minister had to say, and the exact language he used was that he wanted to turn the Strip into a deserted island. I just want to understand from you, sir, first, am I telling our audiences what is accurate here? Because there are multiple media outlets reporting different things when it comes to the situation on the ground. Some are saying that there are no places of escape, points of escape, crossovers that people in the Strip can use. Some are saying, however, that measures have been taken. UN schools are being used to protect those who are from Palestine, who are civilians. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you know to be true on the ground?
Sure. Two things I know to be true. Number one, Gaza is not Israel, and Gaza is not Egypt, and Gaza is its own entity. And the reason why the people have no place to go is because You have a government in Gaza like Hamas, which is hostile towards Israel and even hostile towards the Egyptians. And both countries unilaterally decided that they were going to put strict measures in place to allow Gazans in. Thousands of Gazans travel through Egypt in order to go to the airport and leave. Thousands of Gazans come to Israel every single day to either get medical attention or to work. But on a mass scale, there has to be some limits. There is no non-visa entry into Israel from Gaza. It's its own entity. And I think that's what people need to understand. If Gazans have no place to go, well, it's because of the government that they have in place that has continuously been hostile to both nations that surround them. In terms of the United Nations, their Gazans do hide in UN protected schools. The problem is, and there's videos from several different conflicts over the past 10 years that have clearly shown that rockets are being fired from those schools as well. Rockets are being stored within those within UNRWA schools. So whether or not it's going to be safe on this round, because in the past it was, I'm not so sure. I mean, this is a different scenario. You've had more Israelis die in one day, or more Jews die in one day than you've had since the Holocaust. That has to be digested. And this is something that this shocked the entire nation. You've had more Israelis die in one day from this terrorist attack, and it was a terrorist attack on Israeli communities from Gaza, than have died in the past 2 decades from terrorist attacks combined. Putting that into perspective, you have a prime minister and a government that is under fire, internally, and there's protests about legislation that they're trying to do.
Right.
And then that all gets put aside. Once this happened, the entire country basically stopped protesting. I've even seen neighbors of mine take down signs that they had on their balconies because now's not the time to protest. And you've had Benny Gantz, who is one of the opposition leaders. You've had Yair Lapid, who is the opposition leader. You've even had Avigdor Lieberman, who despises Netanyahu, basically say that they're willing to go into an emergency coalition government if it means the eradication of Hamas from Gaza. And I think that quote that you said, it's not that he wanted to turn Gaza into a desert island. He wants to eradicate Hamas from the strip itself. And that, you have to understand when you're translating Hebrew to English, it's not an exact translation. Hebrew is a very dynamic language, and words have meanings that are beyond one single word. So yesterday, Prime Minister Netanyahu used the term, or it was translated, he used the term, we wanted to cleanse the areas outside of the strip. And people thought that was meant ethnic cleansing, and that's not what it meant. He just meant that they wanted to clean it up from the Hamas terrorists that were inside the communities in there. So you have to be very, very careful when translating what somebody says in a foreign language into another language and make sure that you actually get the context correct. And I think that's part of the problem, is that the context of that specific quote was not correct.
Okay.
At no point, as an Israeli, at no point in time, yeah.
No, I was going to say we're going to come back to you. I just want to go to our third guest, and then I want to come back to you. We haven't gone over to our third guest yet. We have former diplomat Manju Seth, who's with us. Ms. Seth, I'm actually going to, because the two panelists who we had with us were actually in Israel, I wanted to ask them about the situation, but I want to now ask you about the global dynamics around it. We've seen India condemn in the strongest terms the action that we saw take place from Hamas on Saturday morning. After that, we've seen a number of other countries also say that they stand in total solidarity with Israel. Behind the scenes, can you tell us a little bit more about the global dynamics that we might be seeing at play when it comes to countries that have typically, because there are countries in the past that have typically aligned with Palestine, for example, Iran. Are there pressures on those countries right now? Can you tell us more?
As we saw from all the reported reactions of different governments, it has been pretty, muted. There has been no outright criticism of Israel, which used to be the norm earlier. It used to be always supportive of the Palestinians and all these governments, like Saudi Arabia, for instance, the UAE and others, Bahrain. All of them have now called for de-escalation. Nobody has actually, outright supported the Hamas or their attack. And absolutely they cannot, because this is something which is quite unprecedented, and it has been a concerted or a coordinated attack at different points on Israel and on Israel's sovereignty. So they need to the Hamas and the Hezbollah are being given a clear message by Israel that we will not allow this. We will not stand for this. And other countries are also, India, as you mentioned, has also said we condemn this. Other countries have also condemned it, and traditionally, countries which stood by the Palestinians have also have muted their response and just called for de-escalation and to find a solution. And this globally, the support which many countries had, or the sympathy that many countries had for Palestinians, has been diluted very much by this kind of attack and the kind of videos floating around, which are horrendous and horrific. I think they will further sort of show what the Hamas is. It's a terrorist group, and it is really not, it's not, as they say, peaceful or it's a legitimate, country, or not a war in the sense. They're not saying that it's legitimate, we are threatened and we are doing this. It's completely a terror group, and that is clear now for everyone to see that this is a terrorist group, and they are not to be treated as part of the Palestinian people. Because not all Palestinian people are like that, but and there was a lot of sympathy for the Palestinians for very long, and there's also been talk of two-nation theory, which in my personal view, I think might be the best solution. But everyone has to be on board for that, has to agree to that. And these terrorists, I would really call them terrorists because, and as our Prime Minister also said, they are terrorists whose action cannot be condoned. Terrorism is not, and they're targeting civilians. They're not. It's not. If you're fighting a war, then it's something different. This is actually just catching hold and taking civilians hostage, killing hostages, killing civilians, and that is not acceptable at all. These are completely terror attacks. They're trying to justify it, saying that there were attacks on Al-Aqsa and mosque, etc., etc. But that is not something that is acceptable for this kind of action that has been taken. And what is being reported in the media, I think it's really not acceptable.
Okay. Ma'am, thank you for bringing us your perspective. I want to go over back to the two guests we have joining us right now from Israel. Mr. Naftali, if I could just come over to you to ask you, we've talked about the last few hours. We've also talked in specific about the action we're possibly going to see over the next few hours. So when it comes to a longer term answer, particularly again, and I want to talk about the Prime Minister's statement here where he said we're preparing for a longer war here. How are Israeli civilians looking at this? Do they look at this as something that will possibly last over the long term, over the next few years?
Well, you have to understand that while the Hamas propaganda machine is trying to weaken the Israeli spirit and to show that Israel is losing the battle, you can actually see that there is great unity and resilience within the Israeli side. You see a lot of civilians went to donate blood because unfortunately we have over 2,000 people wounded. We have seen a lot of people donating and collecting food and goods for the soldiers that were deployed. So I think that in the coming years, obviously we cannot foresee the future, but I think that what we can know is that we are expecting very long days of fighting, and it's going to be hurting. And mostly, I would say that the Israeli civilians totally back the Israel Defense Forces and are definitely standing behind it, because you have to understand that we don't have any other solution, because it is either we fight or either we cease to exist, because these terrorists, just like Manju here said, these terrorists, they don't want initially any peace with Israel. They want peace without Israel. That is why they say free Palestine from the river to the Mediterranean Sea. That's exactly where Israel is.
Okay. Mr. Naftali and Mr. Engelmay, I'd like to thank both of you in particular for joining us from Israel. Thank you for telling us your stories. Ms. Seth, thank you for joining us, providing us with your expertise. We are going to have to draw our show to a close. We hope that provided you with some clarity, some perspective on what is taking place right now. Now we're going to bring you more, but for now, that is all that we have for you here on the show. Thank you for staying with us. This was The Weekend Debate.